Today we're going to be learning Megillah Daf Tet Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Jonathan Stein in honor of Rena Goldberg on the occasion of her birthday from her children and grandchildren. She is a role model for all of us. And today's daf is also sponsored by Sari Esserman in loving memory of her aunt, Miriam Manover Bat Yosef HaKohen. Okay, we're going to get started from the bottom of Tet Vav Amud Bet. We got up to this part about Nadidash Nat HaMelech. So, Balayla hu Nadidash Nat HaMelech. Somebody couldn't sleep. So the question is, who couldn't sleep? The obvious is Achashverosh couldn't sleep, but the drasha is going to be that it wasn't just Achashverosh, it might have been other people as well. So Amar Rabbi Tanchum Nadidash Nat Malko Shel Olam. It was God who couldn't sleep because he was stuck with this, right? We have this Gzeirah trying to figure out what should he do, how should he, orchestrate things, save the Jew, should he be saving the Jewish people? Whatever it was causing God also to have a sleepless night. Obviously, God doesn't sleep, but, this is the idea. And what is this obviously a reference to? And this, by the way, when we lane it, right, when we read the Megillah, we say it in the tune of Hamelech, which is from the Tefillah on Shabbat, in the middle of, at the end of Nishmat, before Yishtabach, where when we sing it in the same tune that people say Hamelech as a reference that the people think about Hamelech, which is God. And it's about the fact that God doesn't appear in the Megillah at all, and this is a reference to God in the Megillah. Okay, so now Rabbanan Amre, a different opinion. Nadidu el yonim, nadidu tachtonim. The people above and the people below, meaning the angels above and the people below also couldn't sleep, meaning the nation of Israel probably, and the angels. Some people say El Yonim and Tachtonim is actually the people who are the up and the people who are down, meaning, right, Mordechai is viewed as the Elyon and Haman is the Tachton, even though at this point it wasn't yet the case, but that it means, right, the great people and the lowly people. Apparently Mordechai and Haman also couldn't sleep that night. We know that Haman couldn't sleep that night because when the king realizes he needs to do something, he basically goes around trying to find, Achashverosh goes and finds Haman in his courtyard, also in the middle of the night. Rava Amar, Shnat HaMelech Achashverosh Mamash. He says, no, this was just Achashverosh. Naflale milta b'date. In other words, what was bothering Achashverosh that he did this? So something happened right in his head. He says something's wrong. Remember where we are. We're in between the two, right? We're by the mishkeh that's about to happen. He says, my de command is aminte Esther laHaman. Why did Esther invite Haman to this mishkeh, to this party? Maybe the two of them are plotting to kill me. And this, by the way, connects with the fact that he ends up looking to see who saved me last time someone was plotting to kill me. And now we'll see why. Hadar Amar. So the first thought he has is maybe Esther and Haman are plotting to kill me. And that's why I'm invited to this party with Haman. Then he says, Hadar Amar Ihachi. He then says, wait, but if so, I don't have secret agents who know these things and will come tell me. There must be somebody who would tell me what's going on. So therefore, Hadar Amar, his next thought was, right, you can imagine, this is so funny, right? When you can't sleep at night, all these thoughts go through your head, right? So you see it unfolding. First, he starts thinking this, then he starts thinking about this, right? Unfortunately, this happens to probably most of us where, you just start worrying about things and then you build a whole thing and then you start thinking, you start planning, right? Sometimes we plan the best things in the middle of the night. So he says, maybe there's someone who did this to me before and I didn't reward them. And that's why nobody's telling me, because it doesn't pay to tell me, because look what happened last time. I didn't do anything when somebody tried to save my life. And that's why he says, bring me the chronicles. I want to see who helped me and who tried to save me last time and I didn't reward them. Now it says a few strange things. It says, okay, so now they say it was basically, right, okay, I was thinking about these apps that you can, or, when you say to Siri, please read to me my messages, that's basically what happened. It was automatically read to him, right? They had this even before technology. Somehow, in some magical way, the books were read before him, and that's why it says nikra'im in the past tense, right? Gita pointed out, which I also wanted to point out, I forgot, that one of the opinions of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha was basically the reason why she invited them was so that the Achashverosh would think that they're both planning to kill him and he'll kill them both. So it connects here with what he actually started thinking. Now, again, they're going to darshan the language, which you could argue yes or no, but it says katuv Katuv sounds like present tense, okay? He found it was written like it was written right now. Now, this was written a long time ago when the whole story with Bigtan and Teresh happened. Ktav mebaile, it should have said he found the writings, right? It said in the writings or something. So, Melame, why is it in present tense? Well, apparently, and we're going to see angels throughout this entire story trying to finagle things and make things happen the way they want. Shimshai mochek v'Gavriel kotev. Shimshai was a sofer in the time of Ezra, who was known to have written this sitna against the Yudim. We had a reference to this before, how Achashverosh was part of the sitna, and basically he wanted to write an edict to prevent the Jews from building the Beit HaMikdash. So he was obviously a bad sofer, right? A scribe that was not looked upon fondly. He wasn't Jewish. So he was constantly erasing Mordechai's name. And Gavriel was constantly rewriting it. That's why it's katuv in the present, as if it was written right now. Amar Rabbi Asi, Darash Rabbi Shila ish kfar Timrata. Now he wants to learn something from this. If there's something written below that's good for the Jewish people, and it doesn't get erased, meaning even if someone tries to erase it, they can't. So, well, the more so, something that God writes about the Jewish people that will be good, of course, that will stand forever, right? It will definitely happen. Lo na'asai modavar. Okay, now the question is, what happens? So Achashverosh goes and he finds Haman, and he says, what should I do to someone who the king wants to respect? And Haman starts telling him, you should give him the horse of the king and the clothes of the king. And we all know this part. And right, he thinks it's him. And then basically Achashverosh says, do this to Mordechai. And then he says, I went too far. Sorry. Lo na'asai mo davar. I got confused with the lo al tapel mimenu davar. We're going to get to that davar later. But first we have the king asked his people before Haman appears on the scene. I'm sorry that I got confused. Lo na'asai mo davar means they said, oh, by the way, nothing was done to Mordechai, right? He says, oh, I see this guy Mordechai saved my life. What did we do to him? Obviously, the king doesn't either remember or he's not involved in all the things that go on. So they said, nothing was done. So the drasha now of Rava is going to be on why didn't they say he didn't get some amazing respect, we didn't respect him properly. We didn't do that. It just says nothing was done, like very simply, as opposed to saying what wasn't done. So Rava derives from here, Amar Rava, Lo mivnei she'ohavim et Mordechai. If they loved Mordechai and they wanted something to be done to him, they would have said he didn't get proper respect. They would have used the word kavod in there somewhere or something like that. But the fact that they just say, oh, nothing, so elam mivnei she'sonim et Haman. They were really trying to point out, not that Mordechai didn't get what he was deserving, because they didn't really care about Mordechai, but they hated Haman. And this shows how hated Haman was remember, also one of the answers was that she wanted to get people to hate Haman and that, right, be jealous of him and dislike him. Here you see that people disliking Haman worked to our advantage because they hated Haman. So they said, now what does that have to do with Haman? The point is Haman was the one in charge who should have rewarded Mordechai and he didn't. So they were basically trying to say, oh, the person in charge of this didn't do what they were supposed to do, and that was Haman. Heichin lo. So then, right, comes the pasuk, and it says, the king goes out, he finds Haman. What was Haman doing there? Because Haman was coming to tell the king that we should hang Mordechai on the tree, asher heichin lo, that he prepared for him. Now, why does it have to say for him? It could have just said that he prepared, right? He prepared a tree, a gallows, it's all ready. Come, let's hang Mordechai on it. So Tana lo heichin. The Braita says, well, really, Hechin Lo is an allusion to the fact that Hechin Lo, it's foreshadowing. He actually prepared for himself, because in the end, he's going to be hung on it. Some people say, by the way, Lo Hechin is a reference to Achashverosh, and that Haman was also plotting to kill Achashverosh. Aseh ken leMordechai. Amar. Now, if you remember from Akedat Yitzchak, Avram is told, Kachna et bincha et yechidcha asher ahavta, right? There's this whole, right, at Yitzchak, it takes a, right, he basically has to be convinced. Who is it, right, which son, right, that Avram doesn't really want to do this, and he has to be convinced exactly who it is, so that he can't kind of get out of it and say, oh, I didn't think you meant that, I didn't think you meant that, etc. So here also, why does he have to give so many descriptors about Mordechai? Amarle, Manu Mordechai. Haman doesn't really want to do this, so he says, what Mordechai, right? It's a good example. Again, Berachel Bitcha Ktana, also there it says. So anyway, who's Mordechai? Amar lo Hayudi. He's the one who's the Jew, that Mordechai. Amar le Tuva Mordechai Ika b'Yehudai. Well, we all know many Mordechais in the Jewish community. Yeah, that doesn't help me. So then he says, Asher Yoshe B'Shara Amar le HaYoshe B'Shara Melech. Amar le. So now, okay, so he understands this is Mordechai, but now Haman is a negotiator. So what does he say? Amar le Sagele B'Chad Diskarta. Can't you just give him a village and he'll take taxes from the people there and he'll get his village and that'll be his reward? Or give him a nahar, right? People always pay to get over the ferry ride or something. So give him that. Why are you trying to give him this other thing? Amarle, hanami havle. So what does Achashverosh say? Oh, good suggestion. Give him that in addition to everything else. Where do we learn this from? This is what I got confused from before. Al tapel davar mikol asher dibarta. He says, don't drop anything from what you said. Now, from all the things you said. Remember, what happens? Haman says, take the lavush or the sus and give him the clothes of the king, give him the horse of the king. So it should have just said, okay, Achashverosh tells him and do what you said. But here it says, do everything you said, as if there was something additional. That's always, the rabbis always darshan kol, everything. Must have been something that wasn't mentioned in the text. And so therefore they say it must have been, he suggested an alternative and Achashverosh said, oh, put that in also. So now we're going to have a great scene. Haman goes to Mordechai's house. What happens when he gets there, right? What's Mordechai's reaction when he sees Haman standing at his door with a horse? So let's see. And what was Mordechai doing at the time? So of course, Mordechai was learning Torah because that's what Mordechai does, right? Although we'll see at the end of today's stuff that they're critical that he didn't learn enough Torah. So he sees Mordechai's with these rabbis. He's teaching them the laws of kmitza. Kmitza is when the Kohen puts his finger, okay, there's meal offerings all the time, and the Kohen puts his 3 middle fingers in, and then all the extra he basically wipes off with his 2 outer fingers. It's not an easy thing to do according to the Gemaras. Anyway, he was teaching the rabbis how to do this. What's the connection? Why kmitza? So we'll see in a minute some other connection, but the real connection that the commentaries say is, what were the dates? Remember on Yud Gimel, they did the lottery, and it came out what day they're going to kill them. Yud Gimel Nisan. Remember that the Adar is almost a whole year later. So it happened Yud Gimel Nisan. Then Yud Daled Tevav Tet Zayin, they're fasting. We're now in the night between Tet Vav and Tet Zayin, which is the night in between where they're about to bring the Korban HaOmer. And the Omer has a meal offering with it. So he was teaching them how to do those halachas, even though there was no temple. But if there was a temple, that's what they would be doing. So he was teaching them the laws of that. Kevan dechazi Mordechai, Mordechai sees Haman outside with a horse, says, what's coming my way? Says classic, right? I have a window in my kitchen and I see the street, right? I know sometimes before someone's coming to my house, right? It's always helpful to have warning. Mordechai kind of sees him coming and says, I better get out of here. So what does he do? Amar lahu Rabbanan, hi Rashia l'mital nafshikat. He's clearly coming to kill me. Zilu mekame di lo techavu begachalatel. He says quickly, right? He says to the rabbi, get out of here, go away from me, because he's going to destroy me and you might get burned by the coals. If you're near me, you might get killed as well. So he goes on his own and starts to pray. So now they, I guess, went toward the front to leave or to go somewhere else. And Haman comes in and starts talking to the rabbis. That you might think, what kind of conversation could Haman have with the rabbis? And you might be surprised. So now they start in conversation until Mordechai comes out from praying. Okay, it's not like Mordechai's going to hide and not come out at all, but he wants to prepare himself. He wants to pray first. Amar lahu. So what would you say to the rabbis if you met a bunch of rabbis learning? What are you learning? What are you learning today in the Beit Midrash? Funny having Haman ask this question. When we had a temple, someone would give a voluntary mincha offering. He would bring a kometz full, right, a handful of the mincha offering, and he would get atonement. Amar lehu, he said to them, your little measly meal offering of flour came vidache asara afe kikre kesef didi. If you remember, Haman had to pay all this money to get the king, right? It's all this kesef shakal. He took all this money and he paid the king in order to get his edict, his decree against the Jews in. And basically Haman says, even though it hasn't happened yet, but he basically says, your measly little mincha offering is so powerful that it overrode all the money that I paid to get what I wanted. Amar le Rasha. Now, Mordechai overhears this and comes out and says, you pay. Haman's basically saying, I took all my money, or much of my money, and I took it and I paid it to get you, to kill you guys, and it didn't really work. Because you have, your kapara that you do, and that basically saved you. So Mordechai says to him, Rasha, remember we had this midrash yesterday that he was a slave to Mordechai at some point. And he said, basically, where'd you make all this money? You made it when you were a slave. Slaves who make money, their money goes straight to their master. So your money, this money you took wasn't even really yours. It really belongs to me. Okay. That's when he basically says an eved that acquires things, to who does it go? To his master or to himself? It obviously goes to his master. So basically saying all that money wasn't even your own money. Amarle. So now Haman says to him, Kum levush hanemane urchov haisusia, says, go get these clothes on and ride on the horse. Now you'd think, right? Mordechai would be, oh, great. Wow, I'm going on a horse. Very excited. He'll jump right on, but not so. He's got some plans first, right? So first, let's skip the last word, Debai lach malka, because this is what the king wants. Amarle, Mordechai says to him, Lo yachilna, I can't go right now. Okay, I got things to do. What does he need to do? I need to go shower into the bathhouse, right? I need to clean off, and I need to get a haircut. Because basically, what does he say? I can't go wear the king's clothes without looking the part, right? I look like a schlump right now. I'm not, my hair's a mess. My body's dirty. I got to go take a shower. What's the connection? Well, you'll see what happens. Shadara Esther, okay, Esther, with all her power of being queen, what did she do? Asartinu lekule bebani, she had all the bathhouses closed. Ulekule umane, and to all the barbers were basically, sent home. They couldn't work that day. So what was left? Haman was the only one who could basically take care of this. If you remember, we saw this midrash yesterday, that Haman originally, I don't remember if I told you all the details, but in this Prusbuli and Prusbuti, that he was rich and he was poor, Haman used to be a hairdresser and a bath attendant. So this is where it comes from. It comes from this story. That's how they got to it. You wonder, why those two things? Because it comes from this story. So what happens? So Haman basically has to go, right? Worse than having to carry him around. Now he's got to serve him, really, right? He's got to bathe him and cut his hair and all that. He has to go home and get his scissors from his house, and then he cuts his hair. All the while he's sighing and moaning. Oh, I can't believe I'm doing this. So Mordechai says to him, what are you fetching about? I was like the top guy of the king. Now I'm going to be a balan and a sapal. I'm going to be a hairdresser and a bath attendant. What an embarrassment. So again, like yesterday's talk, Mordechai reminds him of where he came from. And he says to him, were you not, and this is where it comes from, right? Were you not the hairdresser in Kfar Kartsum? Tana, in fact, it says in the bright Haman Saparsha Kfar Kartsum for 22 years, that's what he did. So he basically reminds him of, you came from this, so I don't know why it's so far into you. What are you complaining about? So after he gets him dressed and he cuts his hair, he puts on his clothes. I think what's interesting is shakal is to take. So what he means is once he took his hair, meaning once he cut his hair, he puts on the clothes. It's almost like the opposite, right? You remove something, put something else on. So he says, get up on the horse and I'll ride you, right? I'll ride you on this horse. He says, listen, I can't really do it. I've been fasting for a few days and I don't have the strength to get up on this horse. So Haman puts himself down as if he's like a step. Mordechai climbs on his back and gets onto the horse. But Kislik, as he's going up, he kicks Haman. Okay, why did he kick him? Right, kick a man when he's down. But the Mefarshim say what he was trying to do, or at least some of them say what he was trying to do was to get Haman angry, so that when Haman would be traipsing through the city, he'd be angry And then Achashverosh would even get more upset at him because he was supposed to do it with a smile on his face, and this way he wasn't. He wanted to get him more angry, basically to bring upon his downfall, not because Mordechai was just trying to kick him for no reason, but he had a plan. Amarle, lo kativ lechubim, follow vecha al tismach, right? It's always great when the Gentile enemy brings psukim from the Tanakh. He says, what do you mean? It says when your enemy's falling, you're not supposed to be happy. You're not supposed to rejoice. Amarle, hanimi lebi Yisrael. That's for Jews. But when it comes to a Gentile enemy, then it says you can climb on their bamot. Okay, their bamot are their high places, but what it means really here is I can step all over you, basically. I'm allowed to. And now he says the famous line, this is what they do to someone who the king wants to respect. This is a very famous story. They're walking by Haman's street, and what happens? So his daughter is standing on the roof, and she spots him from afar. She just assumes the person on the horse must be Haman, and the person dragging him, right, leading him, must be Mordechai. Shakla atzitza debate kise. She takes the chamber pot, vishadite areshe davua, right, from the bathroom, and she takes what's in it, the disgusting bathroom stuff, and she throws it on her father, thinking that it's Mordechai. Dali ene, she picks up her eyes, the chaze davuahu, and then she realizes as he gets closer that it's her father. Naflami igra la'ara umeta. She falls from the roof and dies, right? Very often when people fall from the roof, it's suicide, or maybe she just gets so worked up and can't believe what happened that she actually falls and she dies. Where do we have an allusion to this from the Psukim? Well, Hainu Dichtiv, Vayashav Mordechai al Shar HaMelech, right? Haman nitchafel beito avel b'chafoi rosh. So then the next thing happens, Mordechai goes back to his house. So what do they mean from that? He goes back to the gate, the king's, the sha'ar of the king, the gate. Amar Rav Sheshet, what was he doing in the king's gate before? Sheshav l'sakol l'tanito. It was very nice that he got paraded through the city, but still the Jews are about to get killed, so he goes back to his mourning. And Haman goes back to his house in mourning and chafoi rosh, right, like covered his head in muck. Okay, Avel al bito v'chafoi rosh al shi'iralo. So that explains he was Avel because his daughter died, and he was chafoi rosh because he had all this guk on his head. Right? So then he goes home, he tells his wife what happened, his beloved people, right? But then he calls them chachamav. His chachamim start to say to him, right? If he's from the Yudim, basically you're going to, that's the end. You're done. You're doomed. So parallel avav, the karilu chachamav. Why does it first call them his people who love him? And then it calls them chachamim. Well, chachamim are usually a term reserved for Jewish people. Wow, ma pitom chachamim. So they say, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Homer Dvar Chochma, Afilu B'mot Ha'olam Nikra Chacham. If you say something wise, even if you're not Jewish, you get called a Chacham. What did they say that was wise? Im Mizer HaYudim Mordechai. Now, we always assume that pasuk means if he's Jewish, right? If he comes from the Jewish people, then he's basically, right, it's clear. He's on the up, you're on the down, and that's the end of it. But what did they say? It really depends on which tribe he comes from. Yehudim milashon Yehuda, Shevet Yehuda. We saw this before. Mordechai Yehudi he wasn't really from Shevet Yehuda, but he was called a Yehudi. We had a whole question why, because he's really from Binyamin, and we're going to see that right now. So they say, right, Im Yehuda, they say to him, if he's from Yehuda, then you're not going to win. Okay, basically, if he's Mishar Shvatim, you can, but if he's from either Yehuda or Binyamin or Ephraim or Menashe, then you're not going to win. Okay, those four Shvatim, why those four? Yehuda, Dechtiv, Yadcha ba'orech oivecha, your hand will be in the back of the neck of your enemies. Enoch and the others, Dechtibu lifnei Ephraim u'Binyamin u'Menashe, orarat gvoratecha. Okay, before them, right, you're going to have to use your strength. They're very mighty. Okay, yeah, basically. So it's true. I see someone wrote in the chat, didn't we say his mother was from Yehuda? That's also possible. It was a possibility, right? There was a debate about that, whether that's why he's called Yehudi or was it for other reasons. But in any case, whether it's that he has something from Yehuda, but also he's from Binyamin, and here Binyamin is in the list of those they basically darsh and psukim, and that's why they were called chachamim, because they realized that if he was from one of those tribes, Haman is doomed. What does it say? In what words does it say he's doomed? Ki nafol tipol lefanav. You will fall before him. That's how we translate it in English, but nafol tipol is a double language. Why both words? Darish Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, shtei nefilot halalu lama. Why two? Amrulo umazo mishulal afal umishulal kochavim. This nation is either like the dust in the earth or like the stars in the heaven. Right? We know this, that they're compared to they're plentiful like the dust of the earth, or they're plentiful like the stars in the sky. This is different, right? Visions that people had about the Jewish people. Now they say kshem yordim adafar. When things are bad, they go rock bottom. But kshem olim ad lekochavim. So basically, they're on the ups now, and basically they're going to go up to the stars, which means you're going to go down, 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 which is why they use the double language. And then what happens? The Sarisei HaMelech come and they rush Haman into the Mishteh, right? Because now we're up to the Mishteh on Tet Zayin. This is what happens again. We have Yudalid Tefav Tet Zayin, which is over Pesach, right? Over the day of they fast, and then on Tet Zayin, the second party happens, and basically Haman gets killed and hung on that day. Okay, this whole thing happened, right? You think of the story, it feels like it happened over a long period of time. The whole thing happened, right? The whole beginning part happened between Yud Gimel and Tet Zayin of Nisan, over the course of a few days. Then, of course, they have all this time until Adar comes, when they basically have to, right? They send out these books and he wrote letters to people to say the Jews can fight back, right? And that's going to happen in Adar later on, and almost a year later. So it's like a funny timing. You don't really think of it that way, but that's really how it happened. So they brought him quickly, meaning he was still filthy from the daughter having dumped all that stuff on him, and he didn't have a chance to go home and shower. He did come home, but I guess he didn't have a chance to shower, right? Lesson learned, right? When you get home and you're dirty, go first shower. Don't start having a conversation with your family. So now, finally, Achashverosh has been waiting for Esther to reveal herself, where she comes from, and now she basically says it. We've been sold, and it's not worth your while. What does she mean? It's not worth it to you. Why? She brings up the past. Remember, we said that Memuchan was Haman, and he was the one who suggested he kill Vashti. She says, look, this guy, all he wants to do, he's just jealous of you. He was jealous of you with Vashti, and he had her killed, and he was jealous of Vashti and had her killed. He's jealous of me, and he's going to have me killed. That's what she means. It's not worth your while. This guy, right, he's just really out to get you. It's a very weird line. It says, the king said Esther Malka. Why does it say Vayomer twice? And why all of a sudden is she called Esther Malka? So Vayomer Lamali. Why does it say it twice? Amar Rabbi Abau b'tchila yedei Torgaman. He used to speak to her with an interpreter. She wasn't important enough. But what happens? She said, I come from the Jewish people. And then he realizes, doesn't say she said this, but she came from the house of Shaul. Shaul was king. He realizes, right, kings love to marry other kings' daughters. He realizes she comes from royalty. So Vayomer Esther Malka, all of a sudden, then he turns to her as she's queen. He all of a sudden, he looks at her as an equal, almost. I'm sure he didn't look at her as a total equal, but almost as an equal. Vayomer Esther. This is a great midrash. Ish tsar v'oyev Haman hara hazeh. Right? We always like this line, right? He's the guy. Now, look at what the midrash says about this. Amar Rabbi Elazar melamed shaytam machva klapei Achashverosh. Ish tsar v'oyev. Right? That would have been enough to say, Ish tsar v'oyev. There's this person who's horrible. Why does she have to say Haman hara hazeh? It's obvious it's Haman. Who else is in the room? She's pointing at Haman. According to the midrash, she pointed at Achashverosh. You are an evil person. But what happened? That wouldn't have been very smart tactically. So I told you there's a lot of angels today. She starts pointing toward him, and the malach comes and moves her hand to point to Haman. Okay, this is very fascinating in this book that I've quoted often from, Fresh Food and Vintage Wine, of Rabbi Yitzchak Blau. He quotes the Torah Tamima and he quotes the Gra, who both have different interpretations, but really are both saying the same thing. It's fascinating. And then he has his own chidush, which I'll quote, which is according to the Torah Tamima, he says basically she said, you're a terrible person, that you agreed to this whole thing, right? And you agreed so, in a second, you were happy, you hated the Jews also, you're terrible. According to the Gra, it was subconscious, okay? She didn't mean to do it, but it was like a Freudian slip type of thing. And she, because she really hated him. I mean, think about, and this is what Rabbi Blau talks about, think about her position. She was sitting there married to the king, who was this awful person. I usually think of Haman as awful, especially because of this pasuk. But Achashverosh was also to be mad, right? He was bad enough, but whatever, he had his things. But imagine being married to him, right? And the whole thing that he raped her all the time. And think about how awful it was for her. And what he points out, Rabbi Blau, is that in the end, she has to stay married to him. At the end of the story, and he says, this is a good example of, you have to celebrate. He connects it with the whole Hallel issue, that in the end, it was this big celebration, but it wasn't complete. And particularly for Esther, she had to stay married to this guy for the long term, right? That was a real self-sacrifice on her part. And she clearly must have hated him. And that's why it came out, whether subconsciously or consciously, she wanted to point a finger at him. But the Malach said, listen, this is not the time, okay? Hold in your feelings and move on and deal with what you're supposed to deal with right now. Next, so now he gets up very angry and he goes out, and then he comes back, he goes into his garden, and then he comes back from the garden. So the way they say it is, because it says he kam b'chamato, in his anger, when he came back, it must have also been he was angry the same. So the question is, why did he come back angry, right? He went out to kind of calm down, but what happened when he got there? Okay, this is like, when I was little, we sang that song, God is everywhere, Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. Well, this is what Achashverosh felt about Haman, okay? So we're going to see the story, not in the same, right, lahavdil, not in the same way of God is everywhere, but in a different kind of way. So just like he got up in anger, he must have come back in anger. Again, the malachim are there. They came, appeared as men. They're uprooting all the trees in his garden. So Amar Lehu, he says, what are you doing here? I didn't hire you. So Haman told us to do this, right? He goes out and he sees Haman ruling everything, and he's destroying his garden. He's with his wife. He's destroying, all these things. So then what happens? He comes back in. What does he see when he comes back in? He sees Haman on top of Esther. It's like, what the heck is going on? Nofel, first of all, it says he's falling, as if it's present tense. What does it mean he's falling? It should have said, Nafal mi, he fell on Esther. He kept trying to get up, but the malach kept pushing him down, that it was hoveh, it was happening right now. He says, woe is to me in my house and woe is to me in my garden, right? I have no escape from this Haman guy. You also, and that's why it says you also trying to conquer my wife in my house, not only outside when you're trying to rule over my garden. Vayomer Karvona. Now we have this song, Karvona, Zachor Latov, right? Vigam, Vigam, Vigam. What does Karvona do? He's this great guy because he suggests, we have this tree that Haman built for Mordechai. Let's hang Haman on it. But Rabbi Elazar doesn't really look so fondly upon him. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Af Karvona Rasha Botaitzaya. He was a Rasha. How did he know about this tree? Because he was with Haman in the beginning to build the tree for Mordechai. But what happened? He saw he was on the losing team, so he switched to the winning team, and then he said, but he wasn't like a good guy or anything. This is in Eov, when it says, when God puts bad things on someone, everyone else is going to basically just run away, right? That's kind of what happens in Eov. His friends kind of leave him. Okay, the anger of the king subsided. Now, the word shachacha could have said kishoch with one chaf. Why does it have two chafs? Why does it have two references? You see again this idea of the king is both God and Achashverosh. Right, that he wasn't angry anymore about Vashti, he wasn't angry anymore about, or I guess the anger from Esther. Okay, now we're going to move aside and we're going to get to Binyamin. Okay, shachacha means that it subsided, his anger subsided. We're going to talk about Yosef and Binyamin. Why we're bringing this up now? So first of all, Mesh has been written, and it starts, I think, from these drashot, but there are many who expound on it much more about the similarities in the stories. Here we're going to start seeing some of them. This was very strange. Yosef reveals himself to his brothers, and then he sends them home, and he gives Binyamin 5 times the amount. He right 5 smalot, and his brothers he only gave smalot, maybe 2. Not unclear. It sounds like plural, but to Binyamin he gave 5. He says, "This is a great question. Would his father messed up on and caused him all this trauma in his life, and which in the end ended up good, but it was pretty unpleasant for him, ending in jail and in the pit and all that." Because of this ketone pasim that his father gave him, now he's doing the same thing to Binyamin. Doesn't make any sense. And yes, the connections are because Esther's descended from Binyamin, and also those are all connected. But anyway, and Mordechai. But anyway, so now Amarav, Bar Machasya Amarav, Hamar Bar Guri Amarav, B'shvil Mishkal Shnei Slaim Milat Shosif Yaakov liyosef Mishar Achiv Nitgalgel Davar V'Yardu Avotenu L'Mitzrayim. Right, the whole thing happened because of this. A little bit of extra wool that Yaakov gave to Yosef. So how could Yosef make the same mistake and give Binyamin more than everybody else? It makes no sense. So not that this really justifies it, but it seems like his whole reason was not because he favored him, but it was a prophecy to what was going to happen in the future. Amar Rabbi Binyamin bar Yefet, and we're going to see multitude of statements he makes about Yaakov and his brothers from all parts of the end of Sefer Breshit. רמז רמז לו שעתיד בו לצאת ממנו, שיצא מלפני המלך ו5 לבושי מלכות. Okay, did I say right? Atid ben letseit mimenu, right? A son is going to come from him, who is going to basically end up wearing these 5 levushei malchut, and that's where it says Shenamar Mordechai yatsa b'levush malchut chela argman, etc. Okay, he has those 5 clothes that he wears. I'm not going to read the whole thing because we're running late on time. But basically, it was a reference to Mordechai is going to come from Binyamin, and that's why he gave him these 5 clothes. Okay, now what happens when Binyamin realizes it's Yosef? So Yosef falls on Savarei Binyamin, on the necks of Binyamin, to which the Gemara says, necks? How many necks did Binyamin have? The neck was a reference to the 2 temples. Okay, he cried about, again, he saw prophecy in the future about Binyamin. He cried about the Mikdash, which was in the section of Binyamin. Okay, people say Tzavar in a Midrashim is actually often like the Mikdash is referred to as the neck because it's like a tall place, I guess, that has prominence. Also, in Sefer Dvarim, it says for Binyamin, Ben Ktefav Shachem, which they say right between his shoulders, which is his neck. Okay, so that's also a reference to the temple, right? That Ben Ktefav Shachem is about that the temple is going to be in his property, and it talks about between the shoulders, which is the neck. So now, Amar Rabbi Elazar, okay, so that's what they said. Ubinyamin bachal tzavarav, and then Binyamin cried on the one neck of Yosef. So why on the one neck? Bachal mishkan Shiloh she'atid liyot b'chalko Yosef atid licharev. Shiloh, the Mishkan, was in Yosef's chalka. So Binyamin cried about the Mishkan. Okay, now it says, in your eyes will see. This is when Yosef reveals himself to his brothers. He says this weird thing. Your eyes will see, and the eyes of Binyamin, my brother. Now, weren't they all together? It seems maybe they weren't. Maybe he just took his brothers aside and then said the statement and compared them to Binyamin. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar len kashem she'en b'libi al Binyamin achi, shelo haya b'mechirati, kach en b'libi alechem. I'm not upset with you, just like I'm not upset with Binyamin, because he didn't sell me. I'm not upset with you either. This was his way of convincing his brothers, right, who obviously, when they realized it was Yosef, they were scared he was going to kill them. So he's trying to say, I'm really not upset with you. And in case I wasn't convincing enough, he says, and you see, ki pi medaber alechem. My mouth is speaking to you. Why does it say ki pi? Kifi ken libi. Always in the Gemara, this pi v'libo shavim. Do you mean what you really say, right? Do you mean in your heart what you say with your mouth? He was trying to say, the way you see my mouth, that's the way it is in my heart. I'm not just saying words, I really mean it. This really isn't connected, but we're saying more things that happened. Then he sent his father all these gifts. What was from the great things of Mitzrayim? Amar Rabbi Binyamin bar Yefet, Amar Rabbi Elazar. All these drashot are either Rabbi Binyamin ben Yefet in the name of Rabbi Elazar, or Rabbi Binyamin ben Yefet, or Rabbi Elazar. Shalach lo yain yashan shedat zkenim nochei menu. Sent him very good wine that the zkenim really appreciated. Okay, next, Vayilchu, we're still on drashot of Yosef and his brothers. Vayilchu gam achi vayiplu lefanav. Okay, this is at the end of Sefer Breshit that we just read recently. It says the brothers go and they bow down to him, right? Because they're scared when Yaakov dies, that they're basically, now he's going to take his revenge. Maybe he didn't because Yaakov is still alive. Once Yaakov dies, what's preventing him? Amar Rabbi Binyamin bar Yefet, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Hainu da'amre yinashe, ta'ala bi'idane sagidle. This is what people say, that fox, when he's in his moment, you should bow down to him. This is a bit of a weird thing. Why is Yosef called a fox compared to his brothers? Ta'ala, a fox. Why is he any less than his brothers? He'd be called a fox in their eyes. They say, okay, we messed up a little. This wasn't said in the right place. This is really supposed to be said on the pasuk. This is when Yaakov bows down on his deathbed to Yosef. Why does Yaakov bow down? Because compared to Yaakov, Yosef is a shual. On the other hand, he was in his prime because he was the head of Egypt. So Amar Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Ta'ala b'idane sagila. You're supposed to bow down to someone who, even though he's a fox, and remember, Yaakov wasn't so happy that his son became ruler in Egypt. That wasn't exactly what he had hoped for his Jewish son. But anyway, you're supposed to bow to him because it's clear he's got something going for him. Now going back to the brothers after Yaakov's death, so he calms them down. Okay, he must have told them things when it says that convinced them, that spoke to their heart. How so? He said the following: a candle can't blow out a candle, right? So he says, not only that, 10 candles can't blow out one candle, meaning you tried to sell me and it didn't work. So how can me, one candle, blow out all of you 10? Clearly, I can't do anything. Okay, back to the story of the Megillah. The question is, what are all these things? The Jews, there was ora, light, happiness, another word for happiness, and glory. So now, what is all this? Ora is Torah, or, right? Torah is always compared to light. Simcha ze Yom Tov. Right? Happiness is always associated with our holidays. Sason zo milah. Okay, the word sason is connected with Brit Milah. Okay, what are imratecha? The things you told me, God? Well, usually God says things vayidabel, but Brit Milah was given with an amirah. So therefore they say sas anochi al imratecha. Pasuk from Tehillim is relating to I rejoice in your amirot, meaning the things God said by amirah, which was Brit Milah. V'yikav elu tefillin. Right? Because kavod is tefillin are for respect. It says, all the nations will see that you have God on your foreheads, on you, and they'll be fearful of you. That pasuk is referring to tefillin on your head. Always think about it, right? Some people are embarrassed to put on tefillin in public, right? This is basically saying that's your glory among the nations. My father always liked to tell this story that when he was in the Air Force and somebody saw him putting on tefillin and they realized he was Jewish, and it was during the 6-Day War. He was in America, and some guy saw him and said, wow, you Jews. And it was that same idea of kavod. He saw that he was Jewish and he was wowed by it. Anyway, so now what's the connection of all these things? So some commentaries saying, what's the idea of this pasuk? That all these were all gzerot that Haman wouldn't allow the Jews to do. And now everything was repealed and they could continue to do all these things that they used to do. Et Parshandata Aseret B'nei Haman. We're now going to learn some things about the 10 sons of Haman in terms of the Megillah, how it's written, how we read it. Amar of Adad Min Yafo Aseret B'nei Haman ve'Aseret, and the words Aseret, right, the list of them, and the words ve'Aseret. Sarich lemimrunu b'neshima achad. You have to say it all in one breath. You always see the person reading the Megillah does it all in one breath. My taima kulu ba'adei adad nafku nishmatayu. Their neshamas left their body all at one moment, so that's why we read them all at once. If you've ever seen a Megillah, if you haven't, you should open one and see, because there's some interesting things we're going to learn right now. The Vav of Vaizata is longer than all the others. It's very large. Why? Like the oar of a boat, which is this big long pole. It's supposed to be like that. Why is that? My taima. Kulu batar zakifa is dekifu. They all got hung one above the other, and on this tall tree, and Vaizata was at the top. So that's why they make the Vav long. It kind of looks like a gallows, right? It's cute. It looks like a gallows, and therefore it's tall. Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, Darish Rabbi Shila ish kvar timrata, kol hashirot, kulan נכתבות אריח על גבי לבנה ולבנה על גבי אריח, חוץ משירה זו מלכי כנען, שאריח על גבי אריח ולבנה על גבי לבנה. Okay, what does this mean? This is blocks on top of bricks, okay, like normally they're built, the shirim in the Torah, like Az Yashir, is written text right justified, left justified, and then the next line is centered. The next one, right, left, centered, okay, and that's basically to show that, right, it's very stable, okay, but if you put ariach al gabe ariach, levena al gabe levena, you put bricks on one side on top of each other and the empty spaces on top of it, right, you have basically everything right justified, everything left justified, and the middle is empty, then basically you have something that is not stable. When you build a wall very tall like that, it falls. So the idea here is that this is talking about the destruction of our enemies. We don't want them to be able to build themselves up. And that's why this year and the list of the Malchei Canaan that are in Yoshua, if you write them on a cloth, they should be written in a one straight row. Okay, in the Megillah, we do the names on one side and the et, right? There's the et in between each one is on the left side. And it's not stable. The big problem here is, what about Ha'azinu? Okay, Ha'azinu is written the same way, unstable. And some of the commentaries say it's because it talks about all these bad things that are going to happen. So likely because of that. But it's weird that they don't mention this in the Gemara. Okay. Now, think, okay, it sounds like announcing, we kind of think it's a good thing, but the king wasn't very happy that all these people were killed. They killed all these people. Again, he started saying bad and then he said good. So basically, why did he start saying bad and then switch to good? It must be the malach kind of veered him off to say, oh no, don't think that way, think positive. This is a weird line. It should say, it should say when she came before the king, she said, Ima Sefer, etc. So what is this amal in the male form? It should be said out loud what's written in the book. Okay, so some people say it's the books that said the Jews are supposed to celebrate Purim. You should announce it, not just send out letters, because not everybody reads their mail. Or it means that I want to be able to read the Megillah out loud, because there has some bad things about Achashverosh in it, and maybe he wasn't going to allow it. And she basically said, I want to allow the reading of the Megillah. So two different ways to interpret this. Divrei shalom ve'emet, amar Rabbi Tanchum v'amar le'amar Rav Asi, v'lamed shetzrichas sirtut kamita shel Torah. The Megillah was Divrei shalom ve'emet. Emet is a reference to the Torah, meaning it has to be written like a Sefer Torah with the sirtut. These are lines. If you have a Megillah and you've seen, right, it has lines on it, whereas usually cloth with Nevi'im and Ketuvim doesn't have that. Ma'amar Esther Kiyam. Okay, this talked about the Divrei Tzomot, that the people fasted, and what Esther did. And then it says, but it sounds like only Ma'amar Esther Kiyam. Ma'amar Esther Divrei Tzomot lo. It sounds like we're doing this because of what Esther did. What about what all the people did? What happened to them? Remember we talked about how important it was that they fast also and that they do their share? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan Divrei Tzomot Ma'amar Esther Kiyam Purim Ha'elu. Purim is to celebrate both those things, not just Esther, also what the people themselves did. Mordechai Yehudi, Mishneh leMelech Achashverosh, Gadol leYehudim v'Ratzoy leRov Echad. This is a famous line. What do you mean Ratzoy leRov Echad? Most of the people liked him, right? This is classic. Leaders don't and never liked by everybody. There's always someone who doesn't like someone. LeRov Echad v'lo lekol Echad melamed sheparshu mimenu miktzat Sanhedrin. This is why I said we get back to. Some of the Sanhedrin was upset with him because he went into public office and didn't learn Torah anymore, or not as much as he used to. And with this, we're going to end with 3 statements about the importance of Talmud Torah. You can never have a sugya without getting back to that. Rav Yosef Gadol Talmud Torah yoter me'atzalat nefashot. It's more important than saving people's lives. Sounds a bit crazy. He was on a list first. It was number 4 on the list. But then he ends up later on a list number 5. What are these lists? Ktiv, Meikar Ktiv, Asher Ba'u Zerubabel, Yeshua, Nechem Yisrael, Eliam, Mordechai Bilshan. He was number 4. Levasov Ktiv, Aba'im Zerubabel, Yeshua, Nechem Yisrael, Ramyan, Nachmani, Mordechai Bilshan. He ends up 5 on the list. He drops down later on to show he basically dropped in status. It's more important than rebuilding the temple. Why is that? Ezra only went after Baruch ben Neriah died. Baruch ben Neriah, who was his teacher, was alive. He had to learn Torah with him. Once he died, he said, okay, I'm not going to learn as much anyway. I can go on Aliyah. This is why it's okay to go away to yeshiva and all those years not be with your parents and doing kibbud avim, because look at the example of Yaakov. He went to the yeshiva at Ever and yeshivat Shem be'Ever and didn't do kibbud avim all those years. Okay, again, these are difficult statements because you would think saving people's lives, doing kibbud avim, and building the Beit HaMikdash are high up there on the list. And this is trying to say how important Talmud Torah is. Whether you have to take these literally or not is a good question. I'll leave you with those thoughts for today. Have a great day, everyone.